The young and the restless spoiler's shock, the quiet unraveling of Sharon's world began not with a scream, not with a phone call in the dead of night, but with an eerie silence that lingered far too long for any mother to bear. It started with Faith missing therapy. Just one session. One therapist thinking maybe she was tired, or caught up at the stables again. Then another session missed. Then a phone call that went unanswered. Then another. Until Sharon, with a mother's dread curling like smoke in her chest, realized something was terribly, viscerally wrong. The police were polite at first, reassuring even. "Teenagers do this," they said. "She'll be back before nightfall." But Sharon knew her daughter. Faith, who had suffered so much already, who had fought tooth and nail to rebuild her life after her accident, after her emotional collapse, after the very foundation of her trust had been shaken, Faith wouldn't just disappear. She was sensitive, yes, and fragile, perhaps, but not reckless. Not anymore. Not since she began healing. Not since Sharon made a promise to never leave her side again. But promises in Genoa City meant little when darkness wanted something more. The search lasted hours, then days, spiraling into the kind of dread that wrapped itself around Sharon's soul like a noose. Nick tried to remain composed, strong, practical. He coordinated with the authorities, dispatched private investigators, turned the Newman resources loose on every corner of the city. But it was Sharon who found her. Not the police, not the search dogs, not the drones. Sharon. In the middle of the night, driven by an instinct older than memory, by a maternal ache that wouldn't let her sit still, she wandered into the western edge of Chancellor Park, a place Faith had always felt was hers, a sanctuary. And there, beneath the twisted shadow of the willow tree where she once read as a child, Sharon found her baby. Motionless. Pale. Gone. The scream Sharon unleashed shattered more than the stillness of the park. It broke something in her that would never be whole again. The coroner called it an overdose at first. No signs of trauma. No visible wounds. Just a girl, barely 16, lifeless with no one there to hold her hand. But the toxicology report would say otherwise. An experimental compound. Not street drugs. Something manufactured, designed. It didn't take long before the whispers began that Dumas was behind it. That Aristotle Dumas, the man who had been haunting the edges of Newman Enterprises like a ghost made flesh, had decided to send a message not through press releases or hostile takeovers, but through the murder of a child. Not just any child. Sharon's daughter. Nick's heart. Victor's granddaughter. The news fractured the town. The press dared not print the accusation, not yet. But everyone knew. It was in the way Victoria stopped speaking in board meetings, her jaw locked with rage. It was in how Victor moved with a slow, deliberate fire, like a lion wounded in his own den. It was in how Nick stopped shaving, stopped sleeping, stopped functioning, consumed with one single, burning need, vengeance. But Sharon? Sharon didn't cry. Not after that night. Not when the funeral was held and Faith's casket, white, too small, too final, was lowered into the earth. Not when the town's sympathy turned into pity, not when friends couldn't meet her eyes, not even when Noah and Mariah both begged her to let it go, to stay present, to grieve. Because Sharon wasn't grieving. She was changing. She was burning. There had been many versions of Sharon over the years. The romantic. The survivor. The caretaker. The phoenix. But this was something new. Something primal. Something made of fury and mother's love and a betrayal that twisted her soul into something unrecognizable. She began compiling files. Digging into Dumas' offshore holdings. Secret connections. Hidden bank accounts. She met with Victor behind closed doors, and for the first time in decades, the two were united not by family, but by purpose. Destroying Aristotle Dumas was no longer corporate. It was personal. Sharon didn't want to see him arrested. She didn't want a trial. She wanted his breath to stop. Nick wasn't far behind her. He'd always been the moral compass. The protector. But not now. Not when he stood in Faith's bedroom and saw the untouched journal, the clothes folded on her bed, the last text she never answered. Nick's pain fermented into rage, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that sits, calculating, cold. He contacted old associates. Men who owed him favors. People who didn't ask questions. The plan wasn't formed in words. It was formed in silence between him and Sharon, in glances exchanged over a kitchen table they no longer sat at to eat, in nods that meant yes and now. They would end this. Together. One final act. An eye for an eye. Meanwhile, the town held its breath. Victoria tried to stabilize the company as rumors swirled about Dumas' true identity. Speculation grew that he wasn't who he said he was. That perhaps this shadowy figure was a resurrected Cain Ashby, back for revenge in the most grotesque form imaginable. Audra tried to keep herself distant, but even she felt the tremor beneath the surface. Everyone did. Dumas wasn't seen for days. Then a letter arrived. A single sheet of paper slipped under Sharon's front door in the dead of night. "Do you understand now?" it read. Nothing more. No name. No signature. Just those words, typed neatly, like an insult carved into her grief. Sharon didn't scream. She laughed. A hollow, terrifying sound that didn't belong to a woman, it belonged to something darker. Because yes, she understood now. He hadn't chosen Faith at random. He had studied her. Known her. Waited until she was finally healing, finally finding hope again, and then he took her, not because of who she was, but because of who her mother was. Because he knew Sharon would never be the same. Because he wanted the world to see what Newman powerlessness looked like. Because he wanted to make it personal. And he succeeded. What he didn't account for was what personal would look like in return. Sharon and Nick didn't go to the police. They didn't file new complaints. They went to someone else. A man Sharon once knew, a name she had buried, a favor she had hoped never to call in. But this was war now. No laws. No lines. Only fire. Within a week, Dumas' private jet was grounded in a remote airstrip outside of Prague. The pilot vanished. His closest associate in New York found dead in a hotel room. His lawyer arrested on fraud charges. Bit by bit, his empire was crumbling, not by subpoena but by shadow. Sharon had become a ghost, and Nick her blade. The final confrontation didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in a ruined chapel outside Genoa City, where Dumas was lured by a fabricated deal. He arrived expecting leverage. Instead, he found Sharon, dressed in black, standing in the altar's pale light. And Nick beside her, a pistol held steady at his side. There were no speeches. No grand declarations. Only questions. Why Faith? Why them? What did he gain? But Dumas only smiled, that infuriating, soulless smirk that had haunted them since the beginning. Because I could, he said. And that was when Nick raised the gun. What happened next was never made public. No shots were reported. No body recovered. Only a burned vehicle found 3 miles from the chapel. DNA inconclusive. No trace of Dumas. No further threats. And Sharon? She returned home. Cleaned Faith's room. Planted a tree in the backyard. She smiled at Mariah again. She even laughed once, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Nick took a sabbatical. Said he needed space. No one questioned it. Victor made sure the official records were buried. Victoria resumed control. Newman Enterprises weathered the storm. But Genoa City had changed. Because sometimes justice isn't blind. Sometimes it's a mother's scream echoing through a park. Sometimes it's the silence after. And sometimes it's a whisper, a warning to anyone who would dare try and break a family that had already survived too much. Sharon had lost her daughter. But she'd also lost her fear. And whatever soul Dumas had left, if any, it now belonged to the shadows. Forever. Let me know if you'd like a continuation, a version from another character's perspective, like Mariah, Victor, or Audra. Or a follow-up where the truth about Dumas' real identity finally surfaces. Cain had always thought himself clever. A survivor. A chameleon blending into the chaos of Genoa City, shifting shapes and allegiances when needed, never fully committing to any side long enough to bleed for it. But as he stood in the narrow corridor of that luxury vessel slicing through international waters, staring into the twin barrels of revenge held steady by Nick and Sharon, all that cleverness turned to dust. He tried to speak, to explain, to negotiate, to beg, but Sharon's eyes, hollowed by grief and lit by fury, didn't blink. Nick's hands didn't tremble. And Cain realized, far too late, that this was no longer about business, alliances, or petty rivalries. This was about blood. About a mother burying her daughter. About a father betrayed by the very mechanisms of power he once trusted to protect his own. There was no room for slick words here. Only truth. Or death. I wasn't the boss, Cain finally choked, his voice a desperate rasp as the gun pressed against his temple. I wasn't in charge, I swear to you, I was just his proxy, his mouthpiece. He used me. He used all of us. Dumas isn't who you think he is. You've never even seen his real face. Sharon didn't lower her weapon. Nick didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and violent. Victor had suspected betrayal before, but this was something else entirely. Somewhere above deck, as the sea heaved beneath them and night fell like a curtain across the sky, the weight of deception crashed down on him. He had underestimated Dumas, that was the first sin. But worse, far worse, he had allowed himself to believe that Cain could be the true puppet master, the orchestrator of this grand assault on the Newman legacy. And now, realizing that Cain was merely a well-paid ghost, a decoy in a much larger game, Victor felt the fury twist into something more dangerous, clarity. The boat had been chartered under Dumas Industries, bound for an undisclosed Mediterranean port. On paper, it was a networking summit for select European investors, a ruse thick with fabricated names, layered identities, and private security. But now it felt like a trap. A maze built for one purpose, to conceal the truth. And somewhere aboard, hiding among the affluent strangers, the waitstaff, the impassive bodyguards and masked musicians, was the real Dumas, the architect of Sharon's nightmare, the butcher of faith, the man who had turned the city's pain into performance. Nick grabbed Cain by the collar and dragged him toward the main corridor. You're going to walk us through that ballroom, he growled, and you're going to point out everyone you know. One by one. You so much as blink wrong, and I swear to God, but he didn't need to finish. Cain had never seen Nick like this. Controlled rage. Focused vengeance. Sharon flanked them, her gaze sweeping the hallway like a blade. As they stepped into the opulent ballroom, the contrast was obscene. Laughter. Crystal chandeliers. A quartet playing something delicate and meaningless. Guests sipping wine as if a child hadn't just been buried in Genoa City. The decadence stung. It mocked them. They moved quickly, their presence too deliberate to go unnoticed. Security shifted. Eyes tracked them. Cain stammered as he pointed. That one. PR rep from Zurich. Clean. That one? Just a wine importer. That couple? I don't know them, but I've seen the man in meetings. Not Dumas. Nick's grip on the gun never wavered. Sharon, growing impatient, suddenly stepped onto the stage, seized the microphone, and with a calm that belied the storm beneath, addressed the crowd. Everyone in this room is now part of an active investigation into the murder of Faith Newman. You will remain where you are. If you attempt to leave, you will be treated as a suspect. Gasps. A woman dropped her glass. The violinist stopped mid-note. The illusion shattered. From across the room, a man in a crisp white jacket began to move. Not fast. Calm. Calculated. Kane's breath hitched. That's him. He goes by Richard de Bourg here, but that's the man I reported to. That's Dumas. Sharon's heart stopped. Nick's muscles coiled. They bolted. The man ducked into the gallery wing, slipping through a mirrored door. Nick followed without hesitation, Kane tripping behind him, pulled along like a rag doll. Sharon moved like a shadow, silent and steady, her gun raised. The chase wound through the bowels of the ship, through kitchens, storage holds, maintenance decks, until finally, in a narrow chamber near the engine room, they cornered him. But the man they found wasn't afraid. He stood, arms folded, watching them as if they were children trespassing in a world too dangerous for their innocence. He wasn't old. Mid-40s, maybe. A face unremarkable in its symmetry. Eyes cold. Voice even. You think this ends with me, he said. It started with you, Sharon whispered. It ends with your corpse. But then, he smiled. You still don't understand. I was a weapon. Just like Kane. Just like Faith. The real mastermind? The one you should fear, is already gone. And you'll never catch her. Her. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Sharon froze. Nick blinked. Kane muttered, no. That's not possible. She used me to get to you, the man continued. You think I chose Faith? I was told exactly where she'd be. How to hurt you. Who better to poison than the one thing still pure in your life? Nick stepped forward and punched him across the jaw. The man fell, bleeding, but laughing. You're playing checkers, he hissed through broken teeth. She's playing gods. Then the lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in. Red strobes blinked. An alarm sounded, fire or breach, no one knew. In the confusion, the man was gone. A smoke canister rolled across the floor. Kane coughed. Sharon shouted. Nick fired blindly into the cloud. And just like that, Dumas, or whoever he truly was, vanished again. By dawn, the ship docked. Interpol agents waited, tipped off by an anonymous source. Kane was taken into custody. So were a dozen others. The ship was seized. Files recovered. Passports forged. Names burned. But the real enemy? Still out there. Sharon and Nick returned home with no victory, only more questions. Victor received word of a second attack, a car bombing meant for Adam, foiled only by chance. Audra's office was ransacked. Victoria's security detail doubled. And somewhere, watching it all, was the woman Dumas had spoken of. The one who had pulled the strings behind the scenes. The one who chose Faith. The one who wanted Sharon to suffer. The war was far from over. And Sharon had just begun to fight.